over the summer. My work didn't slow down in the slightest. Having 2 new employees at my pie company helped with the number of cases and the type of jobs I could accept. Morty was the computer specialist with literally an unlimited amount of time on his hands. I let him take on some missing person cases to see if he could dig up any clues. It wasn't his preferred type of job, but he located one person and passed off the rest of the information he found to the police, because he wasn't able to go to any locations and was stuck in one spot. There was a limit to what he could do. Jimmy, my other employee, was doing a great job closing any jobs I sent her way. She had inherited a shape-shifting ability and was excited to use it for her new job, only to find out it wasn't really necessary. It was also nice to have a second person take calls and answer emails, just as I was about to leave the office for the night. Someone called my name from their car. My heart fluttered when my eyes landed on Abarash. I've been crushing on her since we met. We'd gone out for a quick dinner once and texted about work fairly often. Nothing else happened between us. I doubted she even knew how I felt about her. I really should just ask her out, but something was holding me back. I kept telling myself it was work keeping me too busy to date. "Hey Skylar, want to do a job?" she asked as I walked over. Her gold jewelry flickered in the dim light as she smiled. She could have asked me to jump off a bridge and I would have done it with a smile. Whatever job she might be asking me to do could be as dangerous as jumping off a bridge. On some of these cases, I've barely gotten away with my life. I was lucky to still be standing and speaking with her. "I don't see Nick. Is he busy?" I asked, looking around for my missing partner. I was human and I doubted the corporation would send me alone on a case. She gave a teasing look and lightly punched my shoulder. "You have a good-looking woman talking to you and the first thing you do is look for him," she said with a small laugh. I sputtered, trying to explain myself. She was having fun at my expense and I couldn't help but laugh along. "He'll be by later. We figured since you've been working with so many creatures, we figured you can do some of the investigation on your own. Just take a look around to see what you can find until Nick can join you. I have your gun. We don't want you shooting up the countryside, so we limited you to 2 magazines. She went into her car for a second to get my weapon. I owned a regular handgun, and the corporation provided one with magic bullets which they kept locked away except when needed on a case. The bullets weren't easy to make, and the recharge on the automatic magazine reloads was a lot more than what my bosses wanted to use on a human dealing with minor cases. I was a bit nervous going on my own for any amount of time. She was correct in that I dealt with creatures pretty often now. They were friendly though. Anything that caught the corporation's attention most likely was not. She noticed my mood and did something that made me completely forget about what dangers I could be facing. Leaning in, she placed a quick kiss on my cheek and held my shoulders. "You'll do fine," Abarash assured me. I felt like I could probably take down any kind of creature with her encouragement. Abarash appeared human, but I knew she wasn't. Supernatural creatures were more open to platonic affectionate gestures. A kiss on the cheek didn't mean anything to them. It was just something some of them did with friends. I knew that, and yet I hoped it meant a bit more and I had some sort of chance with her in the future. Thanks. I was so stunned I couldn't speak for a few seconds, clearing my throat. I recovered. "What is the job about?" I finally asked. "There is a pretty old cemetery being desecrated. Humans may not really have much internal magic, but after they die it stays with them. Over time it grows, and that's why places where people are buried can feel so off-putting to the living. We're worried about what has been digging up old bones to steal the magic from them. If it's a cult, that would be bad news. Sometimes they stumble on powerful creatures by accident trying to summon the devil or something. Nick and I recently dealt with a cult that did stumble into a creature so powerful. The corporation would have issues dealing with it if it decided to cause trouble, and that was just from their leader finding something to scare his followers. I didn't want to think about what a cult could find if they were looking for some dark monster to bring to this world. This did sound to be a problem in the making. No wonder they were making a big deal out of some bodies being dug up. All right, I'll look into it. Any freaky cults lurking around, I'll call for some backup." She gave my shoulder another light punch, happy that I took the job without a second thought. Abarash used her car to get around instead of using transportation spells or charms. After I got in and she started to drive, the street around us changed into a very narrow dirt path down a field. She could only drive for a few more seconds. The bumps and rough road were making her stop. The sun hadn't set where she dropped me off. As I started to get out, she leaned over a bit, apparently tempted to give me another good luck peck, but held back. "If you need any help, call us, and I owe you a dinner for taking this job at such short notice," she offered with a wink. Honestly, the corporation expected their agents to be ready for any kind of job at any point. She was just trying to make up a reason for us to go out. I wondered what the dating policy was. Could co-workers go out? I wasn't an agent, so maybe that rule didn't apply to me. I gave her a wave as her car drove backwards down the rough road and disappeared from sight. My head was in the clouds and not thinking in the slightest about the job ahead. When I finally snapped out of it, I looked around to try and figure out where I needed to go. Some bleating sounds came from the distance as some sheep grazed on top of a hill. An old worn brick wall ran along the road, making it look as if I was in some sort of European countryside. A fair distance away, I saw an old church down the road and up a hill. I guessed that was where the cemetery was located, so started to head towards it. No matter how long I walked, it felt as if I had barely moved. The field kept looking exactly the same as I traveled down the road. Hearing a bell, I looked over my shoulder to see an officer riding a bike towards me. I stopped, waiting for him to catch up. The road wasn't really meant for cars, so it made sense the only way to get down it quickly was a bike. "Are you lost?" he asked in a friendly tone. "I'm going up to the old cemetery as part of an investigation," I said, hoping he was already told someone would be by. I didn't have a badge, only a gun at my side. His eyes flickered down to it, marveling at such a piece. His was pretty old-fashioned. I didn't think he'd ever needed to shoot it before. This place was a peaceful one, aside from breaking up some bar fights and farmer feuds. Were the police really needed here? "Oh yeah, we got word about you. I've heard you're missing your new badge, so we got photos and that all sent to our office. Seems like a bit much for some kids playing pranks." "Yeah, I hope it's just prank, but we just want to make sure. By the way, am I going the right way?" The officer chuckled at my question. There really wasn't anything else around besides the sheep. He said if I went by the office first, I could have borrowed one of their bikes. He offered to guide me back because it would be dark soon, but I declined. I wanted to check the cemetery over at night to see if it was really just teens messing around or if something else was lurking around in the dark. Just before he left, I risked one more question. "You haven't heard about anything strange going on, have you?" "I promise I won't laugh. I was recently on a case where someone was pulling an alien prank. I just want to see what all is involved with this that might not have made it onto the official report for being too odd." I didn't add that the one behind the alien prank was a supernatural creature. He paused, debating on what he wanted to say. If there were some odd details, he may have held back, thinking I wouldn't believe him or mock him for countryside superstitions. "Well, people have heard howling," he said in a low voice, even though only the sheep could hear us. "Howling? Like a wolf or a dog?" I asked, interested. "My grandma spoke about black dogs haunting the church cemetery. She said they were death itself, just waiting to drag the ones who see them into the afterlife." She went on about the grim snatching up naughty kids who stayed out at night. I always thought she was trying to scare us, but the howling. And before the groundskeeper passed away, he said he saw a large black dog roaming around. He paused, expecting me to laugh or dismiss his fears. He was trying to pretend he didn't believe in all of this. But the mention of the black dog and the howling had him spooked. I hadn't heard about the person tending to the land. Too bad he was already gone. If I found nothing tonight, I would ask more locals about what other rumors were going around. Maybe your grandmother was onto something. This land is pretty old. It's bound to have some secrets still hidden away. His face cleared at my response. When I started to say goodbye and head back down the road, his expression fell again. The kind younger officer didn't want me up at the old cemetery at night. "You have balls of steel, I'll tell you that." Still wanting to go to that place after dark. No one could pay me enough to go. "Are you certain you'll be all right?" I thanked him for his concern, but said I've handled worse cases before. For a second, he looked to be in awe. It was then I realized I might be becoming a real mysterious character to people who aren't aware of the supernatural side of things. I wasn't this badass agent fighting monsters, but rather someone who did food runs for creatures. I knew the officer would be disappointed if he found that out, so I vowed to try and remain as mysterious as possible for him. He wished me luck and started back down the road, not wanting to be out after dark. The sun was setting fast and I wouldn't make it to the top of the hill before it was night. I worried about wandering around without a flashlight, but the moon gave off enough light to see by. A chill started in the air as I passed through a small wooded area before I finally reached the cemetery. A fog was forming low on the ground, drifting between the crooked and faded tombstones. The old crumbling church stood in the midst of everything, silently watching over the dead. This place was creepy. There was no other way to put it. It was right out of a horror movie, and I half expected some sort of monster to jump out right then and there. Checking my phone, I sent a message to Nick asking when he would be by, but got no reply. At least he now knew where I was. The only thing left was finding a spot to watch over the place and wait. As I walked, I looked over the cemetery trying to find any clues. Aside from food preferences, I didn't know much about creatures. A few tarps covered the dug-out graves. The stones had been knocked over and cracked, even if they weren't broken. The names listed had long since faded. I found some long claw marks besides each grave, making me think there was a creature behind all of this. Or maybe a very dedicated prankster. After looking over the small cemetery, I tried the church door only to see it locked and chained up. The door was newer than anything else in the place. The window was boarded up to keep from people going inside. That was a good idea. This was a prime spot for edgy teens to trash in their spare time. While I was in high school, I knew a few kids who would do such a thing. At first, I thought they were cool hanging around a cemetery at night. When I found out they were damaging the graves, I snitched on them and the gap in the fence they used was repaired. I was so angry at them that I didn't speak to the group again. That place wasn't an old cemetery like this one. People were still being buried there, and relatives went through the pain of needing to repair the damages done to their loved ones' graves. I couldn't help but wonder that if they hadn't been such jerks, if I might have gone down a more goth-oriented path in life, finding a good spot. I sat down on the damp, foggy grass to wait. My gun was heavy at my side. I really hoped I didn't need to use it. I couldn't see the entire cemetery from where I sat and didn't think there was a place where I could. As I waited, my body tensed at every sound, and I noticed just how exposed I felt. Being alone was far more stressful than I ever could have imagined. I desperately wished Nick would be by soon, or that at least he would send me a message saying when he might be able to come over. The half moon crept further into the sky. I suppressed a shiver as the damp sank to my bones. I was about to get up and look around when a noise startled me. I sank down deeper into the fog, hand ready to draw my weapon. The noise got closer and a strange smell was carried over by the wind. It was a burning smell, as if something was on fire nearby. Was someone camping in the woods? The answer came on 4 legs. A blue light flickered through the trees and I almost ran for it. A primal fear drove into my heart, trying to make my body move. The source of the light became clear as a beast walked into the cemetery, towering over the tombstones. I held my breath, too scared to make a sound. The beast that paused to sniff the air was a black dog, or rather, a hound. Its eyes glowed a flickering blue. Its ribcage was showing as silent blue flames poured out between the blackened bones. The rest of the beast was covered in a dark fur, but its flesh stuck so close to the bones it almost appeared to be a skeleton in the right light. I froze, unsure of what to do. I could shoot it, but should I take that risk? Or should I wait until Nick got here? Leaning back its head, the beast let out a long howl that shook the ground. I raised my hands over my ears trying to drown out the sound, my brain feeling like it was rattling in my skull. If this thing could do so much damage from just its voice, I stood no chance against it. I didn't have any time to recover. Those flickering blue eyes landed on where I was hidden. Without any doubt, it knew where I was. By some miracle, it didn't attack at first. I got up, running over the uneven ground trying to put some distance between us. It easily ran around me, blocking my path. My hand went to my weapon, as I knew I needed to get a shot in. My hands shook too much to even grip my damn gun. I cursed myself for being so damn useless. I doubled back, racing between grave markers trying to get away. Due to anything, the dark hound chased me, stumbling and tripping over the tombstones. I got my gun out from the holster as I felt something come down on the back of my shirt. My entire body was lifted off the ground and shook. The beast snagged me by my shirt and holster. The shirt was ripping, but the holster stayed, with some issues. And with a few screams, I unclipped my holster with one hand and kept a good grip on my gun with the other. I couldn't risk dropping the gun again on a case. I was flung to the side, landing hard on the hard ground and smashing my forearm against a decent-sized rock. My vision was swimming, and I was seeing stars from the pain. It was by pure luck that I hadn't snapped my arm in half. Rolling on my back, I did everything I could to focus on the hound. A terrible crunching sound came as I watched it chew through the magazine to get to the bullets stored inside. I could only get onto my knees as I was not stable enough to stand, let alone run. This thing was eating my only means of killing it. I still had a loaded gun, but with a bad arm and my head swimming, would I even land a shot? And why did it go for the bullets instead of my tender body? The answer came at once. It was after the magic stored inside. As long as I held the rest of the bullets, it would go after me, or at least that was what I guessed. There were 2 options: shoot it and hoped I killed it, or tossed away my gun hoping it would leave me alone. It forced my hand in the end, looking up, those glowing eyes drilling into my own. I couldn't do anything else but defend myself. The beast charged, growling and spitting blue flames. The hound could eat me whole in a single bite. Fear caused my mind to become blank. In a second, the thing was nearly on top of me. So I raised my gun and I pulled the trigger. I thought I heard a voice shouting something. In a blink of an eye, instead of the monster eating me whole, or it being shot, someone stepped between us. To my horror, My partner swooped in at the last second, his hand pushing my gun aside, and the jaws of the hound clamping down onto his chest. "Nick," I cried out his name, frightened I was going to see him be torn apart. As I went to pull my gun back towards the beast, Nick had one hand firmly on the barrel, pointing it away. Sweat started on my forehead as my heart beat so fast it hurt. Nick was in pain, teeth nearly piercing through his entire body, and yet he made no attempt to move or let me try and save him. "Calm down." His voice was strained and I was stunned at the request. "Calm down." While my partner was bleeding and in the mouth of a beast as he spoke, how could I ever be calm? My hand shook, trying to fight against his grip so I could move my gun. His dark eyes were silently pleading for me to listen to him. Nick had never led me astray before. I needed to trust him. I slowly released my gun and let him hold it. One of his hands rested on the dark hound's nose, but didn't try and pry himself loose. It was as if he was trying to calm it down as well. My panic wouldn't go away. No matter what I thought of, my head was a mess. The breathing of the monster was putting my nerves on edge so much they hurt. That thing holding my partner hostage only needed to tighten its jaw a little and he would be cut in half. Knowing how freaked out I was, Nick did the only thing he could. His expression turned into a strained smile. A very small one, but I knew that was the best attempt at a smile that Nick could ever make. It was enough to get me somewhat calm. The beast slowly started letting go. I caught Nick before he collapsed on the ground and let him lean against me. His wounds were pouring blood, but his clothing was already repairing itself. I couldn't be completely calm with those glowing eyes staring down at us. I did my best to focus on getting Nick into a better position to recover. "Are you going to be all right?" I asked him. I've seen Nicky go through worse things, but I still worried. He shouldn't be able to breathe after those teeth punctured his lungs. His breathing was a bit uneven, but he nodded his head. He just needed some time. The creature was watching us as the wounds closed up enough for him to speak again. "This hound isn't overly dangerous. It only attacks if something else threatens it. Normally it wouldn't harm humans, but now with guns being able to harm them, they see you as a threat," Nick explained. "No wonder it went after my weapon first. If I never drew my gun or freaked out in the first place, I would have been safe." After seeing such a creature, the logical thing was just to get the hell out of there and run. If Nick hadn't literally gotten between us, we would have fought each other to death out of fear. So now what? Ask it nicely to not dig up the graves and eat the bones. "Are we just going to do a catch and release with it?" I asked, trying to figure out what to do with the monster staring at us. "That is an issue. It's a creature created through forbidden practices many years ago. I assumed the one looking over the land kept it a secret here for a while. The corporation has a list of creatures to eliminate on site and this is one of them." Nick didn't sound too happy about what he was saying. We needed to kill this creature just because it was made with a frowned-upon method. It wasn't a threat to people if it was kept in a place away from them, so why just kill it? I looked over, still a bit afraid of the beast, but not enough to want to go through with killing it. What we heard next fully made it impossible for either of us to harm this creature even after it took a bite out of Nick. A whining came from under the fog. Little blue lights flickered and the hound lost interests in us. It walked over, the fog drifting away from the breeze it made as it moved. For a moment, I caught glimpses of smaller creatures stumbling around trying to find the larger hound. This thing was a parent. 3 very small puppies ran trying to reach the parent who left them alone to hunt. I looked nervously over to Nick. Without a word, he stood up with his wounds still bleeding. He walked over and gave the larger hound a small pat on the side as he got down on his knees and let the 3 puppies swarm him. They yipped and licked at his face, all trying to get in his arms at once. When he started to wrap his suit jacket around them, I needed to break the harsh news. "That's really noticeable. These puppies were a bit too big for him to sneak back home like he did with the small bath. I didn't even know how he stole the twin lizards to get them to a safe place to live. I knew he wanted to bring these 4 to his house, but didn't know how he could manage. Is there some other way to let them live?" I asked, looking them over. His face was still fairly neutral, but I've been around him long enough to tell what a happy expression looked like on his face. And Nick was very happy holding 3 monster puppies. I thought keeping them at his place was a good idea. His house was so well hidden, only a select few could pass through a barrier set up around it. Plus, he had a massive yard where these 4 could live. They wouldn't bother anyone or have any way to leave the property, and they would make very good guard dogs if someone did manage to break into his place. I suppose I could ask. However, I doubt there would be a positive answer, he said, clutching the dogs tightly as if someone was going to take them away right that second. "Nicky, put your foot down. You've done a lot and never asked for anything. These would be a huge help being at your place. I'm sure the corporation can see reason for once." He gave a slow nod, still not certain he would be able to save the 4, but now he would do his best to try. With the case somewhat wrapped up, We called someone in to pick us up. To my surprise, Nick requested Abarash. Her job title was pretty high up there. So when Anchor wasn't available, he could ask her to approve things. I figured she would be easier to convince to keep the dogs alive. The sun was starting to rise as we waited for her to arrive. The 4 dogs knew we weren't a threat and stayed nearby, the parents somehow sensing Nick's character and trusting him near the puppies. When Abarash did come walking through the cemetery, I realized I didn't know what to say. I was just going to gesture to the dogs and Nick thinking that would be enough. Well, it seems you wrapped this up quickly. Too bad these hounds were behind everything. You know what they are, right, Nick? She said in a gentle voice. I was about to speak as he stood up straight to face her. I'm keeping them. That direct statement was unexpected of him. It wasn't like him to be so bold. I looked between them, unsure of how Abarash would handle Nikki speaking up like that. Nick, there she started, but he cut her off. I'm putting my foot down. If you do not let me take them, I'll never let you take another sample from me again. We were both at a loss for words. Nick was holding the only thing he had in order to save the 4 dogs he had come to care about on first sight. The corporation regularly took his blood and hair for testing because his body held powerful magic he was unable to use. I've always assumed they took more than hair and blood, but he's never confirmed it. If he started to refuse them, what would happen? Abarash had hinted that Nick had a hidden power that could threaten the world if the wrong person got a hold of him. They might only be keeping him alive for the testing they could do, regardless of the cases he solved. A dark emotion flickered over Abarash's face for a second. Instead of getting angry with him, she gave in. Fine, you'll be able to keep them. I'll write down you found a different breed of hound so you can't let anyone see them beside us. And you can never use that threat again. I hate to think about what would happen to you if you said that to the wrong person. For a second, her words sounded like a threat. She quickly returned to her normal pleasant self and arranged to get Nick and his new pets back home. Neither Abarash or the dogs really wanted to stay near each other as she made a transportation spell. I was exhausted from the night but somehow only ended up with a torn shirt and a missing holster. When I told Abarash that I would need a new one, she wasn't very pleased about that fact. She complained that dogs chewed on everything, showing she was more of a cat person. I was dropped back home ready to sleep for a day. I needed to get up in a few hours to go back to work and deal with a somewhat lively creature that wasn't listening to Jimmy. When that mess at the office was sorted, I needed to jump into another case. It was on the weekend. I finally got some time to head to the pet store to buy some new toys as gifts for Nick's 4 new dogs. Normally he passed creatures along to others, but I had a feeling he was going to keep these ones. While I was out, he called me asking if I would go to his place. He mentioned he was in a little bit of trouble and didn't know what to do. That was a worrying call. Regardless that he sounded calm on the phone. When I arrived after his driver picked me up, I ran around his large lawn trying to find him to see what the issue was. When I did find him, I really couldn't believe he called me over for such a thing. He was outside petting the larger hound when the beast felt like laying down in the grass. Nick didn't move out of the way fast enough. The massive creature had pinned my partner on the ground, his arms and head free so he could call for help. The entire sight was so ridiculous, his stone-cold expression making it worst. Just move, I told him as I dropped the bags of pet toys on the grass. Not an option. He had only owned these dogs for a few days and he was acting like a dedicated pet owner. He could be bleeding to death and yet he would refuse to disturb one of the dogs if they sat on him. The issue was easily fixed when I tossed a bone for the large hound to chase after. They all were terrifying creatures in their own right. I still felt uneasy being around them. When they acted like regular dogs, it made it very easy to handle. Instead of calling up Abarash on my day off, finally asking her for a real date, I hung out at Nick's place playing with nightmare beasts. I really needed to get my priorities figured out.